Welcome again to a Wednesday Midweek Encouragement. Thank you for joining with us today and being a part of this time together. It's not the way we enjoy doing it, but it's the way it is. Hopefully on the 17th we'll be able to be together, physically be together in our church building. So keep praying about that. Keep looking for announcements on our website, Facebook page. We want to do this as soon as we possibly can while staying safe and being aware of our responsibilities to everyone's health and safety. So we're going to do our best. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you. You know we love you so much. This is Pastor Rice coming to you from the bunker here in Syracuse, Utah, with my favorite little microphone, Lenny, as Pastor Pettit wants to call it. And we want to continue this week with where we started last week. We started looking at wanting to see Jesus in a very raw sense, without any filters, without all of the other stuff that sometimes comes with him. And so we began with a quotation from Max Lucado's book, A Gentle Thunder, and we talked about how the Gospels are essential for humanity, and it has essential information for humanity. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we kind of looked at each of them from a unique standpoint. You can always go back in the archives and read through some of that. We dove into the book of John, and we started with his beginning, in the beginning, and we talked about all of the Old Testament references to the, not all of the Old Testament references, but a number of the Old Testament references to Messiah, and how it was like leaked information that was preparing ahead of time for the Messiah to come. We opened with John. We've talked about the first couple of verses. We talked about verse 14 in brief. We talked about and gave an example of me having a blueprint and someone else building the house, and how Jesus literally housed himself and came among us as a human being. Today, we want to continue along those lines with that thought and continue to visit all of this. In John 1, we find where the light shone in the darkness. To get the right angle on Jesus, the Gospel of John has to catch him in complete and full light. The Gospel of John is fabulous. It's a little different than the other three. It's literally says in verses 4 and 5 from the literal translation. It says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it." We live where things can get very dark. We in this elevated region sometimes can see more stars in the night skies than directly right in the city. And if you get outside up the hill toward Park City and other places where it's not so much light, you don't have as much light pollution, well, the stars pop out at you from millions and millions and light years away, and yet, in spite of that darkness, the light still penetrates, and the darkness can't stop it. John focused a lot on Jesus being the light. In fact, a little later on, we're going to see one of his best little snippets where he met a blind man, and his whole life, the life of a blind man, was darkness. That's what it is, and yet Jesus miraculously healed him, and the man could see. And that event illuminates the work of Jesus for all of us. We are all born in darkness. We know the world is dark, spiritually dark. Before we can move forward in this amazing story, we have to understand a particular truth. And you've heard me say this from various angles, but even the best people in the world are in darkness. They will continue to stub their toes on cabinets and corners until they find the light. So the passage in John doesn't say that humans found their own light or became illuminated by their own self-contemplation or some sort of logic that they've been able to encounter. In the beginning, the Creator, the Word, spoke light into existence, and there it was. It was instant. First, He created the heavens and the earth, but the earth was covered in darkness. When He spoke, the light chased away the darkness, and the darkness He called night, the light He called day. And although light still shines on the planet spiritually, it's still in darkness. If our planet was without light, all life would cease to exist. And I would argue that spiritually this is the case. Those who are not in the light are those fumbling around like somebody in a dark house stubbing their toe on the coffee table that they forgot was there or didn't know was there because it was dark. People can't see Jesus, even though He's very easy for us. They can't see Him because spiritually it's dark. Jesus said in another place, I am come that they might have life. Most people think that they have life, but those who don't see Jesus, the real Jesus, don't have life. He said to a very religious people, they had religion, but no life. They had information, but they had no power. Today, there are many who talk about Jesus, but they don't have life. They have the Word, but not the Word. Their lives are still in darkness, not in the light. After we move from this beginning of John's Gospel into the full feature film and to continue with our analogy, we're going to discover more about Jesus than you ever knew. I personally have known the story of Jesus most of my life. I had an incredible encounter with Him when I was 11 years old, and He filled me with His Spirit. And yet, years and years later, I really began to see Him. Before that, in spite of all the amazing experiences, and they were all great experiences, I hadn't let His light penetrate me to really and truly see. I was depending on what other people had told me. And honestly, at this point, I can tell you, the more I see Him, the better I see me. and my life gets better and better clarity the more clearly I see Jesus. Now, you may have made the assumption that this journey is going to be about maybe better information. And I would say, no, it's not about information. We're talking about illumination, light. Academies and institutions can give you a lot of information, but only Jesus gives you light. And you will see that the way Jesus illuminates is not with facts and statistics and facts. He has an art form of helping people become more aware of their darkness so that they can better see light. And you're going to see this as we continue on. The other theme of John's gospel, other than light, is life. And this will be demonstrated in a story of a man who dies. And not only does he have the coroner's report and a death certificate, but he will have been buried for 4 days. And then Jesus gives him life. While that is only in the physical sense, the impossibility of what happened there shows how dramatic this life really is. It's not something you're just going to read a book about and learn about. This kind of life only comes from above. Jesus came to give life because you and I were dead in our trespasses and sins. This is huge. This is dramatic. And no matter how deeply religious you have ever been, you're going to see everything in a whole new light. All I'm asking you to do is keep your eyes open as you read each verse, as you see him better and better, as you talk with him and let him do a work inside of you. It's not something I can do. I can't open your eyes. I can only bring you to the light. The rest is up to you and your relationship with Jesus. Dead religion and Christian hypocrites develop when people get their eyes off of Jesus. Some churches have their eyes on their buildings, their programs, and someone may have seen Jesus but got their eyes on their blessings rather than on him. And every day of your life from here on out has to be focused on Jesus for this to actually work. Seeing Jesus is not just a program, it's a process. And the more you look, the more you see. The more light, the better you see everything else. John existed so that people could see Jesus. This is why you're here. What you see of Jesus, you will not want to keep for yourself. When you see a beautiful sight like a stunning purple sunset with the mountains or a tree sparkling in the wintertime with frozen ice crystals, you want to share that with it. We take pictures all the time of stuff and want to share it with everybody else. So I want you in like fashion to be ready to share your glimpses of Jesus as we continue to see things and you continue to see things you've never seen before. Let's talk about light for a little bit. The light shines into the darkness and gives life. God, the light, sent someone. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. And we're going to discover a little bit about John. We're going to discover a great deal about John. Here at the beginning of the story, we discover that God is the sender, but he's also, he is the sender of John. And he sends this man, this John, to announce himself. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But Jesus later sends out many more just as John was sent before him. So what the sender sends at the end of the story is where it gets amazing. But I get a little bit ahead of myself. We only want to see Jesus. So why do we have to read about this John guy, right? He's hogging the spotlight. Well, like John, the writer of the gospel, this John did not crowd the spotlight. He simply turned it on. Imagine going to a drama that had no stage lighting. The main actor stands ready to give these catchy lines and his winning smile, but nobody can see him because there aren't any of those people who run around behind the scenes turning on the lights and aiming them directly at the guy. So in like fashion, John is the guy behind the scenes pointing everybody to Jesus. If your local car dealership was giving away free cars of your choice, it wouldn't help anybody who hadn't been told about it. So you and I know about Jesus because somebody helped us see him. Even if you found out about Jesus only from reading the Gospels, you have humans to thank. The writers who spotlighted Jesus. This man, John, is going to be a baptizer. He's going to be preparing the way for the Lord. He knew he was not the light. And that's John 1 and 8. He wasn't the light. And I'll tell you, too many people start off well by bringing attention to Jesus, and then they decide that rather than aim the spotlight, they want to be in the spotlight. We are not the light. Hypocrites want to be the star of the show. They want others to think they have it all figured out. Don't be that guy. the people of Israel missed Jesus because they thought they were the light rather than continuing to look for the light, and rather than look to him as the light. So they became satisfied in themselves. Today, there are Christians that start looking at the good they've done and how much they have improved, and then they end up letting pride kill them. It's too easy for us to think that we are the source. But no matter how good of a witness we are for him, we must never get our eyes off of him. John brought others' attention to the light. No one qualifies to shine his light, yet this is the only way he shines it. This light ignites the wick of every human life, but most suppress it, and they never let the light from above illuminate their very lives. Those who will shine his light like John did help others find him too. A little story. A friend gave a family a wax melting pot for putting good scents in. You've seen the wax melting things. It was a clay jar container with a light bulb under a tray where the wax melts under it. In this particularly active household with younger children, that clay pot has fallen and broken more than a few times. And each time they glued it back together to try to keep it working because there was some sentimental value to it. The final time that it was repaired, one of the children used hot glue. Now, you can turn the lamp on in a dark room, and it does more than just melt wax. So through those cracks in that pot, light's shining out and kind of brightens the whole room now. In a similar fashion, I may not understand why the Lord limited his light to only shine through humans, but I do see how. We all come to him hurt, full of mistakes and setbacks in our life. Those things leave us broken and misshapen. However, rather than be worthless, the light can now shine through those rough places in our lives. In fact, if we were perfect and whole, maybe none of that light would get out at all. Are you ashamed of your past? Have you tried to hide the scars from those times that you were dropped or abused? I want you to know that if you see Jesus, others are going to see him through you. The better you see him, the more he's going to shine to others. So as we continue to prepare for this journey that we're going to be going on, and we're going to be joining John behind the scenes, we get to let the creation see the Creator in a whole new angle. We get to help those in darkness see the light. God has sent you where you are to be a witness. You live in the home you have because someone in darkness needs to see. You took your job because you thought you had bills to pay, but God put you in that job to bear witness to him so others can see Jesus. Your relatives, your school, your church, your neighborhood, and the places where you spend money are all these people in those areas are looking at you. We are light leakers, if you will. That's why God sends out broken vessels and cracked pots without witnesses. This message would never get out. Those who see Jesus truly see him in the spiritual sense to which I'm referring. Those who throw their full weight on Jesus become children of God. To become a child of someone, DNA has to transfer. And as it is in the natural, so it is in a spiritual birth. DNA is a code, a message. It's passed from one human to another. And we pass spiritual code to one another. This is not a physical transfer. It's a spiritual transfer. So the gospel describes us as being born, not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And that's, again, in John chapter 1 and verse 13. This describes the total transformation we're looking for. We cannot do God things in our own human ability. So like DNA, this code is tightly woven into the Gospels. That's why we we're going to take quite some time to unpack all of this that we're looking into. So stay with me for a little while, and we're going to see some things maybe you've never seen before. So, to understand some of the angles that the Gospels use to present Jesus, we have to understand the people, the context, the filters that they were looking through in his day. Some of those filters were so darkly tinted that they missed Jesus entirely. So understanding their perspectives on all of this is going to help us get a better idea. The people to whom Jesus came saw everything through the Moses filter, if you will. Moses was a servant of the Lord who led a very stubborn Israel through the wilderness into the land where they were actually living when Jesus came and dwelt among them. Moses never made it into the promised land, but actually died before getting there. One of the big events in Moses' life, however, was the overseeing of the building of the Lord's house. It was a temporary mobile house. It was a gigantic tent out in the wilderness that the Bible calls the tabernacle. This building had two primary rooms. The front one was larger. In the larger room, there was golden furniture. It had a smaller back room that there was this golden box that served as kind of a portable throne. It was as if God sat there in some sense to rule on earth, though he is invisible. There, Yahweh God could not be seen, but he would appear to them as a flame of fire at night and a pillar of cloud by day. Hundreds of years later, a king in Israel built a permanent building, and God moved out of the tabernacle into a stone building that came to be called the temple. Of course, God is bigger than any building that humans can build. There's no way to contain him or build for him a proper throne. The point is this. The filter that Jesus' contemporaries, the people around him, would have been seeing him through was that God was in a box, so to speak. So when John gives us this snapshot of the Word became flesh and dwelt among us in verse 14, he kind of shatters this view that so many people were seeing God through. Remember, the Creator made flesh. Now, he has become flesh. Why did he do that? So that flesh can become what he is, eternal. We're going to come back to that story a little later, but for now, look at this translation and says, and tabernacled among us. Jewish people reading John would know immediately what John meant when he said that. That word dwelled in his writing meant to set up a tent, as they used to refer to the tabernacle. God found a suitable dwelling place. The baby born in Bethlehem. Not a fancy tent out in the country. Not an ornate building in town. God was manifested in the flesh and tabernacled with humanity. This dwelling place of God wasn't a short-term stay. This was God's new dwelling place. When the baby was born in Bethlehem, God was done with man-made temporary arrangements. He now had a permanent connection to humanity. John was not done smashing these old filters. He continued saying that they could see his glory in a new and amazing way in John 1 and 14. While everyone had tried to zoom in on this distant God who was out of reach, Jesus rather brings God so close that you almost miss him. Yet those who did notice him saw something brighter and more amazing than ever before. Moses had asked to see God's glory, his weighty fullness, but the Lord only showed him a part, the lesser side of himself. The presence of God over Moses' tabernacle was referred to as his glory cloud. John says that glory appeared in the Word made flesh. This glory was more than anything in that building or on that dedicated servant of God. Jesus embodies all of God's nature. Those in Jesus have more than Moses had. Notice John 1:16 said, all and of his fullness we have all received, and grace for grace. Moses had favor with God. The favor, the grace we have with the Lord is so much more. Systematically, John showed us that even the best filters have to be removed for us to see God. The Jews thought nothing was higher than the writings of Moses, though they call them the writings of Moses the Torah, the first 5 books, Pentateuch. We translate that as the law. Again, John declares something greater than what was written by the greatest man in Hebrew history. In verse 17 of John 1, he writes, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Moses brought a demanding code that condemned those who did not behave correctly. Jesus, however, brought the power to live right. The hearers among the Jews might also take the word that John references to also mean the Torah, Moses' writings, including his plans for the tabernacle that came from God on Mount Sinai in the wilderness. The background was kind of odd. God came down to rescue people who were terrified of him. The scene was not unlike an arranged marriage. The regulations kept them from trouble but did not give them closeness with the Almighty. If Mount Sinai, in that analogy, was an arranged marriage, then beginning at Bethlehem we have a love story. Instead of being a scary fire or the rumbling thunder, God became human. God revealed himself to Moses in the most grand revelation of his day. Then God revealed to Moses that there was more that he wasn't even showing him. Remember, no matter how far you've gone in God or what you have experienced in him, I want to remind you, you're still light years behind. I'm still light years behind. Please don't ever grow arrogant or even comfortable in your knowledge of God and how he works. There's always more. The tabernacle had a blueprint with exact dimensions and required materials. The blueprint, remember our analogy, the Word of God's own identity existed from the very dawn of time. Only the physically birthed child of God would really measure up to contain and display the invisible God in a body. Jesus is the new tabernacle, the house in which God manifested himself. Those who see Jesus correctly today are also part of that blueprint. We are in the DNA. We're part of God's own identity, the house in which he dwells by his Spirit. We are all needed. No window is left out, every cabinet in place. You and I are the filter through which others are going to see God. Jesus is the glory and image of the invisible God. Have you been looking at Jesus through a cracked screen, a broken screen, or trifocals, or some bootleg filter? Have you ever seen those filters that pop up that have all kinds of crazy things happening to you? There's spiders dropping in front of you or something kind of crazy. What if you've been looking at Jesus like that? What if someone put a filter on Jesus and you've been looking at him all wrong? See, that's why the Gospel of John brings in some pretty edgy pictures. John is trying to point out all the wrong filters. He aims, he focuses, he shoots And he's trying to take out the target of misconceptions about Jesus. You have misperceptions about him. I know I probably have. I'm sure I still do. I'm still going back to the original and slowly removing these layers of filters and Photoshop things, and because I want to see Jesus unfiltered. I want him exactly the way it was intended, not defined by man-made perspectives. We've not gotten to the details of Matthew and Luke yet about the birth of Christ. First, we're going to take in the big picture from John. When we get to the stories of the shepherds and later the wise men, then we're going to understand better what the celebration is all about. Jesus is far more than a warm, cozy story for firesides and twinkling lights. The story of Jesus is an out-of-this-world encounter. It's about God becoming flesh. In fact, the whole thing people have done with Christmas is kind of put a filter over Jesus. Christmas kind of makes Jesus into this children's play. He's cuddly and soft and pastel, and the real man is much more than a Precious Moments Jesus or a Hallmark Jesus. Without the trimmings and the trinkets, John, the writer, shows this moment. And while we must see the finer details of mangers and myrrh and frankincense and gold, we also have to see the explosiveness of the moment. The inventor of time, the inventor of physics and matter, joined himself to these so that we could join with his infiniteness. The first reader of John's gospel, the first readers of John's gospel looked at everything through a certain hue. It was Moses, the law. So that's why, by the inspiration of God, this writer shows Jesus in contrast to Moses rather than through the filter of Moses. Today, people try to put the Moses filter on Christianity. John removed it. Imagine a friend introducing you to a man saying, iPhones came by Steve Jobs, but there is a new and better technology by Bob Smith here. Or Facebook came by Mark Zuckerberg, but you have to see this new social app by John Doe here. Clearly, at this point, they know it must be amazing if it tops one of the most popular things that we know. Since Jews held Moses in the highest of esteems, to present Jesus like this, in contrast to Moses, was a shock to them. John does not present Moses plus Jesus, but Moses trumped by Jesus. From the very beginning of his gospel, he already demands a decision. Moses had a face-to-face relationship with God like a person would have a close friend, yet John says no one has seen God at any time. The Lord even pointed out to Moses, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. Yet it's the only begotten, the one in the bosom, who declares him. If you had something valuable to carry back, then you would clutch it close to your chest, or bosom, if you will. This popular expression shows us that the Son is cherished above all humans. Not only is Jesus higher than any of the patriarchs or prophet of the past, but he's the one qualified to announce the Father in his fullness. Jesus is the face of God. The invisible God has made himself known in flesh. That's what the scripture said. For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. 2 Corinthians 4:6, if you want to look it up. As we see Jesus, we're not seeing God through a filter. We're not seeing God in the only correct lens. We are seeing God in the only correct lens. We find everything of what God is in the man Jesus Christ. He is the image of the invisible God, in whom dwells all the fullness of the Father. This man is the physical completion of Almighty God. This is why the prophet could say that the Son would be the mighty God and the eternal Father. If the Jewish people had to have their eyes open from tradition and misplaced loyalties, what about today's Christians? Do you know somebody who's Catholic or Lutheran or Methodist or Baptist or LDS, Pentecostal, or maybe they just call themselves non-denominational, and they apply that particular filter to Jesus? Well, are you seeing Jesus through Martin Luther or John Calvin or Charles Parham or Billy Graham or John MacArthur or Joyce Myers or T.D. Jakes or Joel Osteen, or you name it? What if you could just see Jesus without all the backdrops, without all the layers of today's Christianity? Who is the Moses John would call out if he were writing it today? Is it possible that we've become attached to certain individuals, certain traditions, or denominations, or beliefs that are not purely from Jesus? Could we have become attached to a view of Him that's maybe through a broken glass rather than through the reality? Just as those very deeply religious people were in for the shock of their lives in the days of John and Jesus, so we should be ready for wake-up moments as we truly see this man who was born as a babe in Bethlehem. What the 5 books of Moses are to the Old Covenant, the 4 Gospels and the book of Acts are to the New Covenant. So as we're moving forward in this series of seeing Jesus, we're not going to rush over these things. We're going to take our time and try to grasp everything that Jesus taught. Not only do we not want to miss anything that Jesus said or did, but we also want to know that we are accountable to learn them first, but then to teach these things to others as we learn them. As you help others come to see Jesus, you're also going to see Him in an all-new way. What I thought I knew about Jesus was challenged by what I thought I saw when I was trying to help others see Him. There were questions I had to find answers to. There were confusions that I had to help them solve, and then that made me take a closer look at what I thought I knew. And all of these things working together changed me. And I guarantee you it's going to change you too. So I challenge you today, open your eyes to see Jesus through the pure lens of what the Scripture says. Commit to stay with us through this series and get ready for some amazing angles and new life-changing insights. Thank you for joining me today. And next time we get together, we're going to continue this amazing, incredible journey. God bless you richly. You know we love you, and we'll see you soon in Jesus' name.